I'm Nitin Sahani. I teach here at the School of Media Studies, and I'm just delighted. It's such a pleasure to be a part of this discussion and to watch this piece performed live. As I heard from Vijay earlier, this is maybe the 30th time it's been performed live, and probably the first time here at the new school. But just before we get started, I wanted to say a little bit about the artists who are with us here, who have put this together for us. David Fulmer, as you know, has been directing this program here at the new school, MACE, for some time, and he's won numerous awards as a composer, and it's really delightful to have you bring this to the new school. Vijay is very well known as a composer, but also I wanted to mention that he teaches is it at Harvard that you're a professor as well? And I think it's really important to recognize how we cross between film and music in this particular piece, and we'll talk more about that as we go. Anna is an actor based in New York, and she's had a number of roles in film and television-based productions, and she's not been very well, so we're really pleased to have her join us today, despite that. And I brought Craig in to join us because he worked very closely with Prashant on the cinematography. He was the DP in this project, and he's also worked on numerous documentary films. And so I thought we'll get a very good perspective on both performance, the composition, and the production of this project. So maybe just starting out with David, I wanted to kind of have us understand how you've put together this kind of multi-event celebration of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and how you see this all fitting together.
As a curator, it's a great delight to throw in many ingredients into a program. One thing I can't stand as a musician is repetition and redundancy. So I chose three pieces that are extraordinarily dissimilar, yet have the same vigor, spirit, and energy. That was critically important. When I found out that Manus was doing the Rite of Spring, it became immediately apparent that a wonderful companion piece this week would be RADHE RADHE. It's a celebration, it's ritualistic, ceremonial. It made perfect sense. As a curator, that's what I aim for. Almost, there's an imbalance, a beautiful architectural asymmetry to programming that I find so attractive and so appealing. And I love to give audiences different tastes and different sensations, different feelings, different pulsations. That went into this program.
And this is going to be, well, you're performing a series of programs connected to Rite of Spring in New York coming up as well, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
You're performing, you're also doing a number of other programs connected to Rite of Spring.
You know, it just so happens that it seems like there's a plethora of different Rite of Spring festivals, and ever since 2013, the centennial has been marked. There happen to be a number of programs that have been inspired by and motivated by the Rite of Spring. As Vijay said, it's an undeniable work, theoretically, compositionally, aesthetically. It's hard to avoid. Whether you're in an academic situation in academia or not, the Rite of Spring is simply a big brick wall that we have to contend with. Do we go through it? Do we look at it? Or do we go around it? It's a compelling thought. This piece has been so gargantuan, and since its revival, I shouldn't say revival, it's always been played, but lately it's been a thematic presence around the globe. Not here just in New York, but it just so happens that we're paying tribute to it right here at Manus, which is very special.
Which I wanted to ask you about the genesis of this project and kind of your artistic vision going into it with Prashant.
Sure. Thank you, by the way, David, and to all the musicians again for indulging me, and I appreciate the repeated indulgence at the end so we could just bring things into focus. And Well, I talked a bit about how this piece happened, and so I guess what you're asking is maybe more about the inner workings of it. I mentioned that Prashant used the LSO recording of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring as his temp track, and in fact, he wouldn't let go of it for a long time. So one could say that there's a version of this piece that doesn't have me in it. It's actually just basically it's the same. It fits perfectly with the Naxos recording, if you want to try it sometime. But still, it was sort of made in modules, in an episodic fashion in the way that piece is assembled. And you could say that piece has a narrative, but each episode kind of has its own inner logic as well. And so that was kind of the mentality we brought to it, a sort of similar approach, not with the same materials at all, really, except there is a bassoon in it. You may have noticed a fantastic performer. Is he in the room still? I don't know, but he was an amazing force in this ensemble. So there are elements that maybe refer or very briefly quote fragments of the original, but most of it was about speaking to the energy of the film and its own rhythms, the rhythms of the people. I actually went in and listened to the audio from the footage and said, well, this rhythm right here, this seems to be why they're moving the way they are in this moment. So I built from those rhythms, I built with those rhythms, and I orchestrated them. So a lot of what the drummers and the pianists were tasked with was kind of evoking those dance rhythms to get everybody moving and to evoke movement in that way. So there's the rhythm that's in the footage, then there's the rhythm of the footage and the way that it's cut. And so those two rhythms were kind of those two rhythmic profiles were the sort of governing temporal logics that we dealt with. And then there was the sort of the energetic or emotional arc, and that had to do with, in a way, it was a kind of reduction or extraction also from Stravinsky's original, the narrative of that as a sequence of emotions, a sequence of energies, a sequence of kind of affective impulses, you could say. So that's what we worked with. And the clip I showed of Prashant speaking, he says that rather than go chronologically or maintain a unity of place, like, oh, this is the episode from this temple on that Tuesday. Instead, he says, well, this is an episode of women dancing. This is an episode of fire. This is an episode of yearning, So there are these different moments in the piece where footage from different days and places are gathered together around one idea or one theme or one energy. And so that's kind of how we built it, little by little like that, very organically. A lot of back and forth, eventually. Once you let go of Stravinsky, then yes.
You mentioned you were listening to some of the sounds and also kind of composing to some of the rhythms, but at the very end we start to hear some of the live sound from the footage. You don't use it throughout the film at all. Can you talk a little bit about those choices of when you brought that sound back into the film?
Yeah, I guess, well, I didn't want in general to do that, but I did feel that there had to be a moment where, well, first of all, a moment of saturation at the end, because we're kind of experiencing multiple arcs at the same time, the sort of culmination of a few different trajectories. There's the trajectory of Radha and her ecstatic encounter with her beloved. There's the trajectory of in a way, what you'd seen previous to that were these episodes of play that actually become kind of aggressive and violent, and often, in many cases, gendered violence, right? So then what you see directly after that is what Prashant referred to as payback time. It was basically these women beating the crap out of these guys in a sort of ritualistic also and playful way. But what he recounted to us is that in that moment when Craig and he were filming this stuff, he looked in the eye of these women. He looked them in the eye, and even beneath the veil, and he saw that there was an element of it that was real for them, that there was actually a sense of responding to a certain environment that they, the rest of the year, have to deal with. So there is a sense of rebalancing, happening there. So that's another arc that's happening simultaneous to that. And then the third major moment that's juxtaposed is this this bonfire that's the size of a house, and people running through it. Like you just catch a couple of glimpses of this happening, but it's this like massive purging rite, So all of that kind of gathered together. I'm pushing the ensemble pretty hard at that point, but I also felt that essentially something had to erupt into the atmosphere of the piece that would kind of both remind us of where we are and also remind us or bring us into a different kind of imagined realm. So that's kind of why I made that choice at that moment to again disrupt the unity of place. There are other moments in the piece where it's like the ensemble reminds you that it's here, that you're not just watching a movie with incidental music, that the music sort of spills into the room, with the drums kind of going past the final black and things like that. Or even just the pianos stirring up, summoning different energies that are mostly improvised, that are actually of this moment, not of some other moment, So there are those moments, but then there was this other moment towards the end where I felt that something else had to be summoned from somewhere else.
And I wanted to ask you what it was like embodying the role of Radha for this film, and what you felt was the vision that Prashant was trying to bring in that treatment of Radha.
Prashant, excuse me. Prashant wanted me to embody a woman who was completely besotted by Krishna, just completely consumed, and one who just exists really for him. And he made this very easy for me because he just explained a series of scenes, beginning with her waking up in the morning and dressing for Krishna, putting on her earrings and putting on her makeup, and with no thought really to herself, but just to pleasing Krishna. And then it just continues on with the waking to the crowds who are adoring her and in adulation. So it was very straightforward because he was so specific in his direction. It was an interesting contradiction because obviously when he was in Mathura, he didn't really have control over the crowds, but certainly in the Black Box in Brooklyn, he had total control. And it was very easy to work with him because the parameters were very clear. And then since the character was so well defined, someone who's just so madly in love with him, and she's away from him, she can just daydream of him and remember happy memories, and memories where she's being betrayed by him, and memories where she's being pleased by him. And so, it was just of a woman who was just completely enwrapped by Krishna, her God, her savior.
the mythology around Radha and Krishna is well known in India, but she's rarely depicted on screen in that way. And I also wanted to kind of talk about that depiction. It reminded me of Satyajit Ray's films, where women are depicted in a very powerful way with a lot of agency and a mystique about them. And I thought you did that very effectively. And I wanted to hear how you then took that role and prepared for it and then projected your own self in it.
Well, thorough research was really important to Prashant, so he just threw a whole bunch of literature at me. He gave me the Journal of Vaishnava Studies, and I had to read Chaitanya and the Bhagavata Purana, and everything, Gita Govinda by Jayadeva, which really crystallizes the whole mythology of Radha. She's a relatively young goddess, but so I guess I just read a lot, but it didn't really help in actually creating a living, breathing, flesh and body Radha, because you can't act, a theology or a philosophy. So it was all very interesting, and I'm sure it seeped down into me. But ultimately, she was this woman, whether she was elevated to a goddess or whether she was still the cowherd, tending to the cows. She was still ultimately just, a woman who was crazy about this guy. And
Craig, that brings me to you. Since you were filming and also working closely with Prashant throughout the process of editing this project, I kind of wanted to hear about the cinematic choices you made with him. We see a lot of amazing shots, some very close-ups, some overhead shots. We see you capture the rhythm of a very, very chaotic festival in India in a very intimate way. So maybe you can tell us a bit about how you worked through that with Prashant.
Well, thank you. I guess this had been my first time in India, and Prashant had made a film, an amazing film, which you should all see, called Patang, there before. And but always being with Prashant is it's an exercise in learning how to see better and to sort of feel more sharply and clearly. And we kind of worked in duet, where the situations were often so beyond our control that we would kind of somehow just found a way to find our places. And often I'm in the wider shot, and Prashant is always very close, going almost as close as he can. He was the one, from the far shot where there's the fire, when the fire erupts, it's sort of like a fireball, and even at my distance, I'm sort of rearing back. And Prashant was like 10 feet away and had sort of persuaded, the photographers had been beaten away by the guards, and Prashant was able to sort of persuade him to be close and to capture that shot. And that was something about the spirit of Prashant, to understand where to be. And I mean, all of my favorite shots are kind of Prashant, because he's right there and right close and holds. And he'll hold a shot. And so, I mean, even seeing the film, I still learn about that. But we found our places, and I guess the one thing I would say about what he taught me is when we first arrived in the first day shooting in Mathura, we were outside of a temple. And he just, I wanted to film and start filming, and he just made me sort of stop and sit and observe for like 2 hours, and I just sort of tried to settle in. Something that one always needs to learn how to do. But there's so many amazing shots. There's a shot of the dance in the temple, and we're following one person, then he pans away, and then there's another person, and then he pans away again. That's Prashant, and somehow like locked into the kind of rhythm of the room, and knowing he was just completely there and could kind of hold that shot. So I felt like I was, there to, I'm kind of up and above, and Prashant's like right in there. So, but we found a way to duet together, and it did kind of come together in this way. In the editing process, I would just say that, he, again, was holding this together, and we would just sort of sit and look at things, and he worked with other folks as well. But it was very deliberate, and yeah, he was very much in love with the Stravinsky at first. So.
I wanted you to contrast that with the shots when you had Anna or Radha in Brooklyn, and how you, and it's a stark contrast between those two rhythms in the film. And so there's a quiet kind of meditative quality to those scenes.
When we were talking about that section, after the film premiered in UN's Durham Prashant felt that we needed to experience the goddess. There's the whole feeling of the summoning of the crowd and the movements of it, of the invocation, and then she arrives. And we thought a lot of different ways about it, but it was the idea of her waiting and her attending that seemed very important. And so we sort of storyboarded and tried to sort of design it. Some of the images kind of come from, what was the name? I've forgotten the name of the title. Under the Skin, and for example, and the shots were very deliberate. And then in which?
The reader.
The reader, yes. Thank you.
Well, it's interesting. He had me watch all these films, and they were Under the Skin. Scarlett Johansson plays this alien character who goes on this journey, but she's basically, not doing very much. It's so minimalistic compared to what happens in Mother and Braj, and similarly with the reader, they're very self-contained. So the contrast between, almost nothing happening, seemingly nothing happening, and everything just exploding.
And then, the other point is just, I think there's such amazing moments where we just feel your emotion move from here, and the shot is slow, and then it moves to there, and it's sort of like a feeling of he's not coming, or, that has such an emotional power. So it feels so minimal in your performance, and yet I'm feeling the emotion in those.
Thank you.
As scaled down as it is, it seems so focused, and yet we feel this movement. Yeah, I don't know, the contrast of that was very much Prashant's conception, I think.
Vijay, do you want to add something about working with Prashant jointly on this project, and also when you worked, what came up for you in terms of the challenges of doing this sort of piece?
Well, there was a joyous challenge of just basically having this idea from scratch and then embarking on this year-long and then actually 2-year-long process of doing it, like taking it as far as we could go within the constraints of budget and favors and human involvement that we could and materials that we could summon, and the thing about Prashant is that he was so collaborative, like actually insistently wanted input from everyone, He wanted to bounce everything off of everybody. He wanted it to actually land right. And so to do that, he would involve everyone in the process. His father, his mother, his sister, his best friends from high school, all these people who I came to know from all these different chapters of his life. And it was because he actually wanted it to speak to everyone, and he wanted it to speak for everyone, He wanted everyone to find their own way into the film. And if he hadn't done that, if he couldn't account for any individual response to the work, then he felt that would be a failure of some kind. And so we all, that was infectious for me. And actually I learned a lot about how to include people, how to include the listener, the observer, how to include, how basically to build community through art making. That was one of the great, joyful lessons of just being in his presence and working with him.
I just want to end with asking David what it was like working with the students here at MACE and preparing them to kind of perform this very complex piece.
It's always a joy. My favorite time of my season is right here at the new school at MACE. I've come to know the students in a special way. We've made so much music together over the past 3 seasons in multiple dimensions, this being an extraordinarily large one this evening. And the journey that we've taken over the last 2.5 weeks has been tremendous. I think it's testimony tonight of the extraordinary abilities of every one of these young virtuosi. It's incredible. We began rehearsals 2.5 weeks ago, and when you build a program like this, you start with a shell. And as each rehearsal goes by, you see a little more detail engraved in the wall. And as time goes on, you have this gorgeous tapestry that's inlaid with specificity and detail. That's incredible. It's heartwarming when I think about the journey that we've made. I'm not surprised because we make this journey multiple times a season, but this was a particularly tall order, and it's very interesting. The product is always sublime when you're working with young musicians that have the fire in them and the integrity, the musical integrity that they have. It's tremendous. We're used to doing extraordinarily complex music. It's complex and it's complicated. Those two things are a recipe for hard work, and that's what we've been up against. This has been a Herculean project, I'd say, from the first note until the last. And it warms my heart to know that we gave these pieces tonight a second world premiere. In many ways, that's extraordinarily special. It's an honor. It's an honor to the music, and it's an honor to make music with these young virtuosi. It's just tremendous. So I thank them. At the end of the evening, I thank them. And I thank MACE and the New School and the pioneering ways which we came to bring this music to all of you. This is what we work for, is to give you a palette of color, of emotion, spirit, cultivation, beauty. That's what we aim for. And I hope you enjoyed this evening.
I know many of the friends and family of some of the performers are here, and I wanted to open it up for your questions. So if anyone wants to do that, we have mics on both ends. Please feel free to come down and ask a question. Do we need to bring a mic out if you're, yeah. While we're doing that, I'll just say that I incidentally met Prashant 4 years ago when his film premiered here at the cinema just a few blocks from us. And I was working on my film, which was also a film about kites, and Patang is a film about kites. So we had been connected through mutual friends to see each other's films. And I took my family to go see his film, and it was just a joy. And I could see the kind of aesthetic and style of Patang reflected also in this film, which I think is a great legacy Prashant left us with.
Yeah, I was first of all, I really enjoyed the whole program. I was curious for the piece, Radhe Radhe, to what extent were either Indian classical or Indian folk forms, were they considered, like, I was curious how you conceptualize incorporating them into the piece, and also like with the rhythmic clapping, was that a reference to, like, I don't know, bhajans or kirtan or something of that nature? I was curious about that.
Yeah, thanks. You know, like I said, I kind of tried to capture and orchestrate some of the rhythms of the people, you know, the rhythms that were motivating them to act, to dance or to sing. And so that's a lot of, you know, the more repetitive, like, tendinitis-inducing parts in the piano, for example, or in the percussion parts were basically about that, like impelling people to act. So it wasn't so much a straight transcription of folk music. It was more the ingredients of it, you know, that I tried to capture as faithfully as I could without cheapening it or trying to exoticize it. And yeah, bhajans in particular, because basically what, you know, that song that you hear at the end is a bhajan, that there's this roving gang of folks just caterwauling, basically just like yelling at the top of their lungs, drunkenly or high on bhang lassie or something. So there's a kind of a joyous sprawl to it that I wanted to capture. But there's also a lot of precision in the drumming and in the singing and in the handful of instruments you hear, the folk instruments. So there's actually, towards the end of the first half, the two pianists pick up these kartals, which are the symbols that are used in congressional singing in across India. Okay, so it was sort of meant to capture that and drive the music in that way. But I didn't really want to do a straight transcription of a bunch of folk songs. What I wanted to do was more get into the heart of it, the energy of it, and the spirit of it. Yeah.
Question?
Was the piece in a rag, in a kind of scale, a given Indian scale? Or any of the folk melodies?
Well, some of them, I guess, had that kind of we're dealing with specific sets of pitches, you could say. I wasn't really trying to make rag-based music, but to have those kinds of melodic fragments embedded in a more chromatic palette, or a palette with more textures and more a different range of harmonies and things. And they keep moving around as you hear and as you played very, very excellently. So they don't really stay fixed. And there's a lot of different versions of the same melodies that you hear, kind of juxtaposed or sitting alongside each other. And I think the other thing about it is that there are moments that are alap-like, you could say. So not so much in a rag, but opening a space in the way that the meditative part of a raga, of say, a Hindustani classical performance might begin by introducing just a handful of, or just a small amount of information, or just one phrase, or just a line that kind of opens a space, you know. So there was that sort of, maybe in the temporality of it, there was that meditative quality at times, and there was the more, just more animated, percussive qualities at times too.
Any more questions? Okay. With that, I just want to thank Manus, and also to Susan Barry, who helped us bring this together and organize a lot of the things behind the scenes, and to Vijay, David, Anna, and Craig for being with us today, and all the students who performed in this amazing piece today. So thank you very much for being with us.
And a big hand for David Fulmer for leading the ensemble intrepidly and composing an incredible piece of music. Really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.